Hi, welcome to another literature lecture with Professor Dennis. We're going to start, as always, with a screen share. This one is for Sonny's Blues. Let's get this pulled up nice and big. So with this one, we're going to look at a little bit about the author. We're going to examine some of the historical settings surrounding this story, and then we'll look at the elements of the story itself. James Baldwin was born on the 2nd of August in 1924 in New York City. He died in St. Paul, France on the 1st of December of 1987. He was raised in a poverty-stricken environment under an abusive father. Some of the challenges that Baldwin faced were homosexual prejudice in addition to racial prejudices during the height of the civil rights movement. In truth, this means that he had to face two different types of oppression in his life. The civil rights movement was taking place in the 1950s, which is when our story is set. Baldwin alludes to the presence of racism and the emotional scars that it can create. He uses Sonny's father as an example of the violence and trauma associated with the prejudice and racism experienced during this period. The atmosphere and mood are one that comment on the feeling of the oppressed, and this leads us right into our story setting. The story is set in Harlem. You should have read the materials presented with this piece to better understand the history of this unique location. During this period, Harlem was a harsh environment and serves as the backdrop for the emotional turmoil in the story. Sonny is self-destructive and mirrors the environment. The narrator is motivated to leave the horrible surroundings. Houses, exactly like the houses of our past, yet dominated the landscape. Boys, exactly like the boys we once had been, found themselves smothering in these houses, come down in the streets for light and air, and found themselves encircled by disaster. The very tone notes the destructiveness of the location. In this story, we see a lot of duality in the light and the dark. While the narrator is drawn to the light, Sonny finds his solace in the darkness. Sonny seeks solace through his art of music, yet the places he goes to play are not typically full of light and happiness like one might expect of a place where solace is sought. However, these locations provide Sonny with safety as he escapes into the darkness by immersing himself in it. Thus, the theme of darkness emerges with the possibility of escape in the dark. Sonny is a jazz musician. Now, jazz has a rich history. Jazz is a uniquely African-American art form. Therefore, it is uniquely tied to the African-American experience. In the 1950s, jazz artists like Charlie Parker were a voice of creative expression that spoke to many African-Americans. Many prominent jazz musicians of the time period were addicted to illegal drugs. Some of these examples include Billie Holiday, Miles Davis, and Charlie Bird Parker. They were all heroin addicts. Jazz and drugs are both ways of escape, and this is a trend that we see with many musical artists even today still. Bird became known as one of the bebop greats. Bebop at the time was a new subgenre or form of jazz. It was favored by the youth and incredibly popular. Sonny refers to Louis Armstrong's music as down-home crap because it's old-fashioned and considered more acceptable by society, more mainstream. In other words, it was acceptable for the predominant white culture, whereas Bird was not as mainstream. And so he found this unique niche with the original audience of jazz, African Americans, and especially the African American youth. Bird was considered a musical genius despite his intense heroin addiction. But instead of shunning drugs, the younger musicians opted to actually try it to enhance their abilities. And we certainly see that in Sonny's blues. I hope this has been helpful and insightful for you. Definitely think about that theme of darkness and how Sonny immerses himself in darkness on multiple levels. It's a very unique and interesting piece and definitely helps us to see a little bit of a glimpse into a historical time period here in the United States and in a very unique location itself. Harlem is incredibly unique in how it started and in how it developed and then eventually in what it became. So make sure you're checking those hyperlinks so that you can pull some of that in to your discussion this week. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know.